What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back with a spoiler-free review for The Amateur. Coming our way on April 11th, but what I can say, it's a very solid, very enjoyable, but maybe not quite first-rate kind of spy thriller starring Rami Malek, Laurence Fishburne, Rachel Brosnahan, Holt McCallany, John Bernthal, one or two actors who might... It might even be a spoiler to even discuss the fact that they're in there, but we can discuss the basic premise of the movie, so here it is, ripped straight from the pages of Wikipedia. After Charles Heller, a CIA cryptographer, loses his wife in a London terrorist attack, he realizes his bosses will not act due to conflicting internal priorities. Having blackmailed the agency to train him as a field operative, he embarks on a one-man mission to hunt down his wife's killers. And if you've seen the trailer to the movie, then you know the basic hook of the story, because the character played by Rami Malek, in spite of the fact that Rami Malek is quite shredded and fit, the character that he's playing is physically unexceptional. He does a lot of really nerdy computer stuff for the CIA. He's really good at decrypting secret files and that sort of thing, but if he were to pull a gun in haste and point it at somebody, he very well might point it in the wrong direction. He has absolutely no experience with the physical side of what the CIA does. However, when his wife, played by the lovely Rachel Brosnahan, once again, future Lois Lane, gets suddenly murdered by a bunch of terrorists attacking this building in London, he decides, well, there's nothing's going to stand between him and getting his revenge. And not only does he want revenge, he wants them to feel the exact same fear and anxiety and uncertainty that she must have felt on the day when she was killed. And what's infuriating him is the fact that the CIA is not cooperating. The CIA basically has their own, larger picture or their larger strategy. And if they go after these individuals, it might interfere with that. And so as Rami Malek's character kind of goes on the run, it's an interesting framework where he's pursuing people who are trying to escape from him, but at the same time, the CIA is trying to slow him down or catch him before he gets himself killed or gets into trouble, etc. and so forth. And along for the ride, the great Larry Fishburne, Laurence Fishburne himself. And even though he's not quite as young as he used to be when he was playing Morpheus in the Matrix, he can still do some of the physical stuff, and he plays both a great tutor and mentor early on, as well as a great... well, I don't want to go too much into the details or the plot or the mechanics because that'll get me into spoiler territory. In any case, if you like Laurence Fishburne, you'll be thrilled by his performance here in The Amateur. But the filmmakers who brought this to the screen include director James Hawes, who he's got a ton of TV credits, but he's probably most famous for directing the entire first season of Slow Horses. I've not watched Slow Horses, but I know it has a rabid fan base, and I think they've done 6 seasons at this point. Slow Horses, very popular show. And the screenwriters for this movie are Ken Nolan and Gary Spinelli. Ken Nolan, he was one of the screenwriters on Black Hawk Down, and Gary Spinelli helped write that Tom Cruise flick that came out a couple years ago. What the hell is it called? American Made from 2017, which I did not see. But I guess the most credit should go to the original author, Robert Littell, or Littell, I'm not quite sure how he pronounces it. He wrote this novel back in 1981. I checked out his bibliography to see if there are any future amateur movies or stories to be told, and it looks as if this movie is based on a standalone novel, but who knows, if Robert Littell wrote a bunch of great spy novels, you could probably repurpose some of them to be future installments for The Amateur if this movie is successful, because I just found out the budget on this fucker is $90 million. I was like, whoa. I don't know if I saw $90 million on the screen, but it's a 20th Century Fox movie, and 20th Century Fox is now part of Disney. And their whole strategy for having Fox as a studio within the studio, I'm still not entirely sure what they're doing. But if you like the 20th Century logo and want it to continue, well, then put your money where your mouth is and buy a ticket to see The Amateur. But perhaps I'm putting the cart before the horse, because we haven't even figured out yet whether or not there's an audience for The Amateur that would like to see more stories featuring The Amateur. And I'll say this, I enjoyed it. I didn't love it, but I'm not necessarily a huge junkie for spy stories and that sort of thing. Every once in a while, I'll read a John Le Carré novel, but it's pretty rare. There are people out there, I have friends who are just fiends where they've got, stacks upon stacks of spy novels that they've read, and they'll watch any spy movie from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they just eat it up. And I guess in the late 90s and early 2000s, Tony Scott used to really excel at making these kinds of movies where he could take what is otherwise kind of pretty straightforward, a pretty straightforward espionage story, but he would inject so much style and so much insanity and so much kind of visceral intensity that it would elevate the movie and make it must-see viewing. I would say James Hawes has directed this movie in a very slick, competent fashion, but no one's going to come away from this saying, oh, like James Hawes, he's the next great visual stylist for the spy genre. Like, I guess when you're making a spy movie, because we've had so many spy movies in the past where the music's insane and the photography is beautiful and the women are just stunning, it definitely raises your standards for what you want from the spy genre. However, if what you want is just to watch a pretty nerdy guy being incredibly resourceful and using basically the power of his brain to outwit and outsmart and eventually assassinate a lot of really, really bad people, it is satisfying. I mean, Rami Malek is an incredibly intense actor. And obviously, I think, did he win the Oscar for Bohemian Rhapsody? He won an Oscar for something, but he's been a Bond villain at this point, obviously the star of Mr. Robot. And he's popped up in a bunch of other things like, in Oppenheimer, Amsterdam. I mean, he's everywhere. He's got incredible emotional intelligence. And, when you're playing a part where he's not known for shoving his fist through someone's stomach and tearing out their spine and that sort of thing, he's outwitting them. It is good to have an actor with incredible emotional intelligence who can express all the horror of having recently lost his wife to just a horribly violent tragedy where you get to see in real time her fear and uncertainty right up to the bitter end. That would fuck up anybody. And I feel like Rami Malek does a great job of really selling that. And also just the fact that he's on this path looking for vengeance. He's fully dialed in emotionally. Perhaps the material is not quite on the level of his acting ability, but once again, it's just a very solid espionage story. And it helps that Rami Malek is surrounded by a very deep bench of very, very solid actors. Like Rachel Brosnahan, I would say maybe she's a little underutilized, but that's the role that she signed up for. John Bernthal is also a little underutilized, but that's also the role that he signed up for. But John Bernthal makes the most of his few short scenes. I love John Bernthal. Who else? There's one actress that I really want to mention, but I feel like it would be a bit of a spoiler. I'll say this, just to kind of throw up a smokescreen. If you love the actress who played the wife of Christian Bale in Ford v Ferrari, I'll say that she's incredible in this movie, and in a lot of ways kind of steals all of the best scenes in which she appears, but I'll say no more because that'll be giving stuff away. Holt McCallany. I feel like he was if there were ever an actor tailor-made to play CIA operatives, it is Holt McCallany. I first discovered him in that show Mindhunter, where I thought he was incredible, but he and Julianne Nicholson, they're very believable as people who have basically been working in, what's the CIA headquarters building? It's got the famous name. CIA headquarters, is it Langley or what the hell is that? But once again, I'm showing off just how ignorant I am about the spy genre. Sorry, I misspoke. The headquarters is located in Langley, but the name of the building is the George Bush Center for Intelligence, which they do mention in the flick. But getting back to Holt and is higher up in this movie, played by Julianne Nicholson, you can totally believe that they've been working in that building for 40 straight years without ever once coming up for air. And they probably should sign up for more movies like that. But I guess the real sizzle of this movie is watching what happens when Rami Malek, who once again is just a big computer geek, is coming face to face with some really rough customers, people who dealing weapons internationally and all kinds of crap. And the trailer, unfortunately, gives away some of the best sequences from the movie because each person that he hunts down is like its own little individual set piece. But when you show off two of your best kills, well, then it doesn't leave a whole lot left over for the movie to present, even though those scenes are they're longer and more complex in the movie itself. So there's definitely a few thrills still tucked away, but sadly the trailer does overshare. But one ingredient to this movie that I like quite a bit, a huge chunk of it is set in Istanbul, Turkey, aka ancient Constantinople, where if you're a fan of From Russia with Love, either the novel or the movie, and arguably both the book and the movie are two of the best James Bond stories that you will ever experience. But I feel like that city is it's the ideal location for any international spy thriller because it's where East and West come together, where you can see Europe on one side of the Bosphorus and basically the Middle East and Asia on the other side. And it's such an interesting clash of influences, and due to its incredibly complex history, you've had different people in control of that city over the years. So I just feel like it's such an incredible cocktail of different cultures, and so it's just the ideal setting for a little espionage and spies running around and killing each other in the streets and all that good stuff. And I was lucky enough to go there a little over 10 years ago, and I went straight to all the locations that were featured in From Russia with Love. So if you ever get a chance to go to Istanbul, I highly recommend it. But what else can we talk about that's not a spoiler? I'll say this. I don't think The Amateur is as good as Black Bag, a movie that's sadly been underperforming. But what Black Bag has to offer is great characters, really slick dialogue, a ton of sex appeal, and a lot of twists and turns. The Amateur is a little bit more straightforward. Perhaps it's a little bit more commercial. Like if you were to shave the rough edges off of Ridley and or Tony Scott from the early 2000s, you might get something like The Amateur. Perhaps it's going to be a little bit more accessible to most people just because, once again, it's just a straightforward international spy thriller with a nerd taking out the trash, one bad guy after another, with a few kind of twists and turns along the way, but it's not trying to reinvent the genre. It's just trying to execute in a really solid, satisfying fashion. And sometimes that's enough. I mean, my audience was totally full. Also, quick question. Are all the movie apps starting to go haywire? Because in my theater, at least last night, like half the people were in the wrong seats or having arguments. There was somebody sitting in my seat, and they, angrily declared they were in the right place. I mean, they were like, they had their feet out, the popcorn, they were fully set up. I made them check their ticket. Of course, they were off by one row. They were in C10 as opposed to D10 where they were supposed to be. But then, of course, I have this guy sitting behind me, grumpy and pissed off throughout the entire movie. But for like the first 20 minutes of the movie, everybody's having all these debates around there. So I think the AMC app and the Fandango app are perhaps starting to clash or giving each other confusing information. Or who knows, maybe people are just morons and don't read their tickets. Who the hell knows? But if you want to look on the positive side, I thought it was cool that on a Saturday night with an early access screening for a spy movie, that they could basically sell out the screening. There's still an audience that craves these kinds of movies. And I think as Hollywood sees the kind of golden age of the superhero genre coming to a spectacular end in a lot of ways, as they search for new genres or new frontiers, I think they'll dust off and rediscover a lot of old school genres like spy thrillers, because there's just such a rich library, especially made over in the UK. But I feel like, and I'm a casual, and I've seen a bunch of good ones. But I feel like this is a genre where, if this movie hadn't been made for $90 million, I would say that it's a great, simple, easy genre to execute. I mean, Black Bag was made for about 50 or 60 million or something like that. And yeah, it remains to be seen what kind of audience remains, or they all just been trained to stay home and watch shows like Slow Horses. You tell me. But I have one or two more very, very minor grievances, but I'll say this. The main villain of the movie was an excellent choice. He's an actor that I really respect, but I won't give away who it is. Problem is, you could tell they basically had him for like a day or two, and they shot all the scenes all at once, but they expect too much from the big reveal to have like the emotional impact. But I feel like there should have been some confrontations between him and Rami Malek earlier, or basically give us something so that we can get invested in him as like the central antagonist. I feel like they saved the best for last, but by that point, like, who's this guy? We're invested in all these other characters, but this guy's a total stranger. It didn't necessarily have like the emotional impact that I was hoping for. And also the reality is the movie's probably just a tad too long. I think it's 2 hours and 2 minutes. Let me check real quick, which is a totally fine length for a spy thriller. It's 2 hours and 3 minutes, but you got to earn that length. There were definitely some scenes where I was like, all right, that kill's over. Now I can run to the bathroom, or I can eat my sandwich, or whatever the case might be. But you can definitely kind of perceive the structure as it's unfolding. And at a certain point, I was like, all right, guys, I know where this is headed. An hour 45 or an hour 40 probably would have been just fine, but we'll find out on Thursday and Friday if and when this thing starts selling tickets. I hope it'll do well, because I want to see more movies like this, and obviously you don't get more spy thrillers if the big ones, the big expensive ones, especially if this and Black Bag both fail, well then it's going to be a tough uphill climb for the spy genre moving forward. But one final little nitpicky grievance, and perhaps I'm saying this only because I like the actor, but Holt McCallany, he's very present early on in the story, and they kind of tee up this big giant story featuring the character, and perhaps some of his scenes got cut due to length. I mean, who knows? Maybe the original cut of this movie was 2.5 hours, and they shaved it down to 2. He kind of mysteriously drops out of the story except for a few key scenes in the latter part. Like, you have this incredibly charismatic actor who's good at playing like a semi-corrupt CIA guy. Use him. Put him in the movie. I mean, like, Laurence Fishburne is used to great effect, and Rami Malek is used to great effect. So I just feel like Holt McCallany, perhaps could have used a little bit more text or a little bit more material in the latter part of the movie. But like I said, these are all very, very small, nitpicky grievances. Your mileage may vary, and other people, I wouldn't be surprised if they like it a little bit more, and there are probably other people that might like it a little bit less. I don't think anybody's going to hate this movie. I mean, if you drag a 3-year-old child to be like, this is so boring. But I think most people who are conscious and thinking and breathing and like a good story, like a good plot, they're going to enjoy The Amateur. I guess in the end, this movie gives us a good plot with a couple of good actors. It doesn't reinvent the wheel, but it is satisfying. But I think that's all I've got to say about The Amateur. I'll be back on this channel later this week reviewing Warfare, which I'm seeing in IMAX on Wednesday night. And I've noticed in the comments in recent weeks that there are a lot of people that are very fired up about it. Like, they keep saying things like, why are you reviewing these stupid movies like a working man? Like, talk about Warfare. I'm like, I haven't seen it yet. Like, I cannot review a movie or talk about a movie that I've not yet seen, but I'm seeing it on Wednesday. But I hope I like it as much as the impassioned commenters seem to do so. Or anyway, I've kind of lost track of where that sentence was going. In any case, some commenters on this channel loved Warfare. I don't know where they saw it, but I'm fired up to check it out. That seems to be like one of the big A24 movies of 2025, and I hope it'll deliver. And I just hope that either Warfare or The Amateur or both can sell some tickets, because if so, those movies combined with the second week of Minecraft, we might see a nice big healthy weekend at the box office this coming week, which is good for all of us if you want this art form to continue. But that's all I've got to say for now. Remember to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Hope everybody has an amazing week, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.